Hey everyone, I'm Tisha, and welcome back to Not Your Average Goat, the show dedicated to celebrating all the shapes, sizes, and colors of diversity as well as adversity. This week I sit down with my friend, Chelsea Gilchrist. We talk about what it was like for her as a teenager coping with her grandmother's dementia condition and some of the regrets she still has today about not fully understanding what the disease was back then. We also dive into her incredible career in gerontology and aging and talk about some of the work she's done to advocate for social isolation, falls prevention, and even some of the incredible work she's done as a volunteer president for the junior board of the DC area's Alzheimer Association. We also talk about a handful of issues that are plaguing the aging community today, including the unfortunate reality of many older adults being separated from their pets, despite the immense research that exists to show their value. Then we zoom in closely on the ironic ageism that Chelsea herself has had to face in an industry that's dedicated to stopping ageism, and her journey to eventually gaining confidence and finding her own voice. Let's get started. Hey, Chelsea, thank you so much for joining me today. I am so glad to sit down and talk to you.
Thanks so much for having me, Tisha. I'm excited as well.
We have actually known each other for a pretty long time, although recently we haven't had too much of an opportunity to connect like in person, mainly because of the pandemic, but we started working at the same organization. Well, I started there in August of 2015, and you, I think, had already been there for a handful of months, but we worked at a nonprofit together and our paths kind of crossed multiple times there. We were in different departments, but because I oversaw a lot of our marketing efforts, I would work really closely with the programs that you were supporting there.
Yeah, I remember it too. I still remember when we first met. It was in a communications meeting. I remember I was fascinated by your presentation because you were sharing some data you had recently analyzed on the topics that our audiences were most engaged with. And being the data nerd that I am, I loved that. I didn't know you could do that with data, and you searched data in the way you had, especially like how to identify the quote unquote gaps in topics that we should write content about. So I think our shared love for data was really probably what helped us to connect so well.
Yeah, and I really always appreciate it. Like you would come to me with so many questions like about SEO and like the dashboards I would put together. And I really appreciate it because I never really knew, like I spent so much time prepping the dashboards, especially early on in my career at the organization. And I never really knew if people were actually looking at it or if they were looking at it and being like, what the heck is this? And then just like were too afraid or nervous to ask me questions about it. So I always appreciated like when you came to me and you had this question. It's also just because there's really no one else there for me to nerd out with. So the fact that you were just so curious about what I was doing, it was fun.
Likewise, I think you're truly in my work today. I still do a lot of communications work, but I think that you were part of what opened my eyes to the value of how data can be used as part of your communication strategy to enhance it. And so, I don't know, it was just kind of, I think it was, of course, luck that we met at that organization, but it just kind of showed our shared passion for it and where we went with our careers from there, I guess.
One thing I really love to do with the people on the show is to go back in time a bit because I know the people who I'm talking to mostly as adults. And I don't really know too much about their childhood. So I'd love to know, like, who was Chelsea, like 8, 9, 10 years old? Like, what were you into? What kind of passions did you have?
Well, I loved animals. I think I would have rescued every stray cat and dog from the street if my parents had let me. We definitely rescued a couple, but my dad eventually would put his foot down when our house was quite full. I was very studious. I loved dancing and cheerleading. I also loved playing with Barbies and stuffed animals, but especially the babies, like the little Kelly dolls or Barbie babies, and then the stuffed
Oh,
animal babies. Um, I guess, you know, looking back, that kind of makes me, that should have been the sign that I clearly have a passion for nurturing, because I just love playing with baby dolls so much. And I was definitely very shy as a child.
yeah. Are you still shy today, or do you think you kind of grown into more of a extroverted type of personality?
I think I've grown into the more extroverted personality, definitely. It took me, with the help of some really wonderful mentors, um, and different experiences, of course, in my careers. But I think I've gained confidence now in my own voice and my ability to stand up for what I believe in. Um, but that definitely, it took time. It definitely took time for that to happen.
As a child, too, you were also very close with your grandmother.
Yeah, very close. I was so fortunate that she only lived a couple of towns away. And so a lot of when I was a child, I don't remember as much because this was before I was maybe 5 years old. My grandmother would actually come and babysit me every single day. I think up until I was about three, while my both of my parents went to work. And so she was crucial in my everyday upbringing. And then once my brother came along, my mom stopped working for a bit. And so my grandmother wasn't over as much every day to babysit us. But as we grew older, we were always visiting her, probably at least every couple weeks, or she would drive out to come see us in our home. We moved at the time. And I have such fond memories of her. And I think we probably shared a lot of the passions. She was also a really big animal lover. She always was surrounded by her dogs and her cat. So a lot of really good memories with her. And I know not everyone is as fortunate as I was to be able to grow up with their grandparents, but I really treasure those memories of her.
So I was the first granddaughter, and I think I count myself lucky as well because I and a couple of my other sisters who are close in age to me, we got to spend a lot of time with my grandmother. She didn't babysit us daily like I think your grandmother did, but at least quite 2 weekends a month, we would go over to her house. She would take us out. Like I remember, like every year in August, like we would go to the state. She would take us to the state fair. We would do this whole like back to school, like clothes shopping.
Oh,
We were always going to the movies, and we would always make fun of her because like no matter what time of day we would go to the movies, we would find her snoring like 30 minutes into the
no
movie.
way.
We would make fun of her. And now, now that's what I do. Like I cannot go to the movies anymore. It's just a waste of money on me. I just fall asleep.
That is hilarious.
Yeah.
I've never heard of that before.
Yeah.
And the fact that you have that same behavior as your grandmother now as an adult.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. We're actually both left-handed too. So I don't know if that has anything to do with it. You can't stay away from the movies if you're left-handed. I don't know. But
Oh, that's so
yeah.
sweet. What a fun memory of her.
Yeah, yeah, but she also had like her interesting quirks too. So she actually taught me and my sisters that we had two bellies.
What?
She taught us that we had a food belly and a junk food belly. So every time we would like say, "Grandma, like I'm full, I can't eat any more food," she'd be like, "Is your food belly full or is your junk food belly full?" And of course, being kids who were like obsessed with treats, she was like, "Just my food belly, Grandma. I can still eat junk food."
Oh my gosh, that is the cutest thing. And that's,
Yeah.
what every grandparent probably loves is the ability to like give their little grandbabies junk food and spoil them with the things that maybe their parents won't give them every day.
Yeah, a lot of fun memories. And I feel really lucky because I have a set of sisters and like cousins who are much younger than I was. And so they didn't really, I think, get the same experiences as I did with my grandmother because my grandmother was starting to get older. And now my grandmother is actually in a nursing home because she started to deteriorate about
Oh,
10 years ago or so. But she's just wasn't the same grandma, I think, to my younger siblings and cousins that she was to me. So I definitely like count myself lucky, similar to you, that, not everyone gets to have that experience, especially if like grandparents or parents had their children later in life, and just naturally they're much older, like when the grandchildren are kids. So.
Yeah, that's so true. And so then, what's left is to share the memories of, the grandparent as you knew them, and try and preserve those memories. But it's so difficult. It's so difficult.
Your grandmother actually was diagnosed with dementia. What do you remember most about that experience? And like, how was that for you to find out that she now had dementia?
Wow. It was very challenging, very confusing. And I've always been a fixer. So I see a problem and my mind immediately starts thinking through potential solutions. And, I very quickly found out that dementia is not a problem that I could fix. And at the age of about 14, when we really started learning about my grandmother's dementia diagnosis, I didn't really understand what dementia even was. There weren't really a lot of educational resources back then, at least none that I knew of, to educate children and young adults about what dementia was and how they could still positively engage with people with dementia. So I remember thinking like, oh, she just forgets things more. That's all. She's a little bit more forgetful. But dementia is so much more than that. And I still regret not understanding more, not knowing more of how much more complicated the disease was. And it was just really challenging. She was a very independent, vibrant person. That woman had a more social life than I think I could hope to have as an adult. Really involved in her community and cherished her independence. And of course, as her dementia developed, that we had to limit that independence for her safety. Like, we remember one time, was my grandmother was my father's mother. So my dad got a call that my grandmother had walked to the grocery store and was found like walking in a nearby neighborhood and couldn't remember how to get home. So somebody had found her and she couldn't, articulate well about how to get home. So my dad had to pick her up. And I remember another time she had parked in a parking garage, somewhere in the community, and she couldn't find her car. And she had been walking around the parking garage for at least a couple hours and had started to get cold. And eventually, I guess she asked someone for help, or maybe the security guard had found her. And my dad had to come to the parking garage to help her find her car and get home safely. And I think that was kind of the turning point, or one of the turning points that I at least knew of as a child, and where the disease is really affecting her safety. And we needed to move her from her treasured home where she lived independently with her pets and all of her friends nearby to an assisted living community. And that transition was really, really difficult for her. And as a child, it was really difficult, I think, to witness. Of course, like as a child, I fought with my own parents plenty of times, but seeing my adult dad argue with his mother, my grandmother, about something as important as where she lived, and that there wasn't another choice. She had to move for her safety. It was just weird to see that change in dynamic, I think. And I guess, yeah, I still really regret not understanding at that age that it was so much more than memory loss. And one story really stands out to me, actually, that kind of as I don't know, a turning point to me. I remember we'd visit her often in the assisted living home. And we had taken her out for ice cream some Saturday afternoon. And my dad, I don't know, for some reason, he was out of the car, probably paying for the ice cream. And it was just me and my grandmother in the car. And in the front seat, here I am thinking, oh, grandma just has memory loss. So why don't I remind her of all of her favorite things? So I'm starting to rattle off like, oh, Nana, do you remember your dogs. We were taking care of her dogs, Tucker and Gracie. And did you remember your favorite color is blue? And after some silence, she just sharply, with, a very sharp tone, she goes, yes, as in, kind of like in an angry way. And I remember being so taken aback, like, oh, I'm just trying to remind her favorite things. But what I didn't understand was it's not so as much, at least in her case of dementia, that she'd entirely forgotten things like her favorite color or that she loves animals. It was that the disease had taken her ability to speak about such things. So she remembered her favorite color was blue. She didn't need me to remind her of it. It was just that she couldn't articulate for herself, that she wanted to wear her blue dress instead of maybe the pink one or something. And as a child in that moment, I thought she was angry with me. I didn't understand why. And so I wish, and part of what I try to do in my own career now is to give people those educational tips or reading materials about what dementia is and what it isn't, and how to best communicate with people that have it. I was kind of sorry. That was a lot of information all at once.
It was very helpful though, and I think does a really great job of illustrating not just some of the common misconceptions about what dementia is. And I think, for some people it is, they're not remembering things, but that's not the entirety of the chronic condition. But I also think that story was so great because it really illustrated from your perspective, like the impact it had on you trying to cope with your grandmother now having this thing that's taking away some of her independence and ability to really speak for herself, when you had really always seen her as just like this super strong, vibrant person. I remember I mentioned that my grandmother also went into a nursing home about 10 years ago. And I remember the first time I went to visit her, she's also been dealing with dementia too. I remember going to visit her and just asking, like talking to her, like, hey, grandma, like, what did you have to eat today? Like, did you see the game last night? Cause like she loves, like, we're from Maryland. So like she loves watching the Oriole games and the Ravens games. And I just remember her just giving like these really short answers, just like yes, no. And it was just like very short and kind of like how you described your grandmother. Like it almost sounded like agitated that I was asking her these questions. And I also just didn't believe that she actually remembered them, because then I started asking her like more intricate questions like, oh, well, like, tell me what you had to eat. And she's like, I had food. And I just, I know it was funny, but I remember like it was the first time me seeing her in this environment. And then like there were other people there too. Like at the time, my then boyfriend, now husband, was there. And I think like one of my sisters were there. And she started calling like other people in the room by the wrong name. And I just remember out of nowhere getting this overwhelming sense of grief.
Yeah.
Because like I had like a really close relationship with my grandmother, and like I'd never seen her like this before. And I had to like leave the room. And I remember walking out into the hallway and just like pacing and like putting my head in my hands and just like I just started crying. And I had to like stay out of the room for like 10, 15 seconds or minutes, because I don't know, I just felt so broken. And today, like in the moment, it was so hard. Today, like I actually feel like it's weird. Like I actually feel like she's gotten like a little better. But back then it was so hard for me to see her like this.
Yeah. Oh, that's so devastating to hear. It reminds me, a caregiver to a person with Alzheimer's that I recently interviewed, they described the journey as continued waves of grief and loss. Every couple weeks, there's something new that you're grieving about that person that, maybe they don't remember your sister's name, or maybe they don't remember their favorite foods, or they're less able to communicate. Every day you lose a little bit more of the person you love so much. It really is the most devastating journey. I think my greatest regret, if you will, is that I wish I had known better ways to engage with her and communicate with her and spend time with her. Just because, for example, she couldn't communicate with me verbally, her mind was still very, very active. And I knew she understood everything I was saying. And so I wish like I had tried to engage with her more in different ways rather than just thinking, oh, she's just, more of a shell of the person that I know and love, and losing those missed opportunities, I guess, if you will, for connection. It's really tough when it's your grandparent that's going through this, and there's only so much, that people like you and I at those ages knew and understood how to help.
Did her condition kind of expedite and get worse throughout the years?
It got a lot worse, unfortunately. She moved from what she started in a mostly independent retirement living community. We moved her from her house to that community where she had her own apartment and she had her dogs with her. And she treasured her pets, so they were a really big part of her life. And then as she was less able to care for herself with those, typical activities of daily living, like cooking for herself, bathing, grooming, she moved into a memory care unit, I think is what they called them at the time. It's basically, assisted living, nursing home is what we call them now. And I think that was the hardest move of them all. It was essentially, one level, very large, I don't know what you'd even call it, building, I guess, with 4 different wings. And they all connected through this giant circle, almost like a roundabout. And so it was all these people who suffered from memory loss or dementia, just wandering around in this building, not necessarily always knowing which room was theirs. To me, knowing the life that she'd lived and how active and independent was, and seeing her that be where she spent, I think, at least a year of her life, was really sad. I don't know if it was the disease taking away her ability to speak as much as she wanted to, or maybe a lack of interest in it, because she was so sad with her living arrangements, having to move. But she became a lot more quiet. And I remember a turning point in that nursing home that she was in. We would visit her almost every single weekend, at least my dad and I, usually my mom too, my brother too. And we came one time and she was sitting in one of the community living areas on the sofa, and everyone was watching TV, and her head was down, and it seemed like she was sleeping, and it was the middle of the day. And my mom went up to her and she said, "Hi, Mom, how are you doing?" Trying to make conversation. And my grandma was pretty non-responsive. And if it hadn't, alarms immediately went off in my mom's head. Thank goodness. And she said, "Something's not right. Mom usually doesn't act like this. We should take her to the doctor." And thank goodness we took her to the hospital, because she had a very painful, long-term, apparently, urinary tract infection that the nursing home staff hadn't picked up on. And that was what was causing her to be so tired and really out of it. And thank goodness we were able to get her the care and take care of that. And we, of course, moved her out of that facility soon after. But to me, that was just one of those moments. Again, I was a teenager, but this woman I loved so much, she didn't have her voice anymore, the ability to speak and articulate that she was in pain. And that was so painful and upsetting to me, as, of course, someone who loved her so much, that she was voiceless. And I had wished so much that, I wanted to be her voice for her in any way I could. But of course, my ability to do so was limited, since we didn't live with her. But it was one of those turning points for me, and how people with this disease suffer so much and really depend on those around them to be their voices.
Something that I regret is I went to visit my grandmother in the nursing home one time. And I remember like when I went to visit her that time, just like after 5 minutes, she basically said like, "Hey, like you can go now. Like I'm ready for you to leave." And what I regret about that is for me at the time, I thought that, maybe she was tired or maybe she was embarrassed that she was struggling to communicate in a way that she thought was like okay, like acceptable. And she was just embarrassed that she could no longer speak in the same way she was able to before. And, because we lived so far away, I didn't get to go visit her a lot. But my sisters, who were a bit closer, they got to visit her a little bit more. And I think through asking more direct questions and kind of probing and prodding a bit, we finally realized like she just wasn't happy there. And then we started to see certain signs throughout the facility that she was staying at, like it always would have like a really weird smell, like it hadn't been cleaned in a while. And then like one time when my sister went to visit my grandmother, she like found her like just sitting like in her own mess, like no one had cleaned her up that morning.
Oh no.
And so like my sister would go there and would like clean my grandma up, even though there's like on staff nurses, like comb her hair, like help her get dressed and like all of these things. And it was just very, very unfortunate and very hard to deal with, especially because even though my grandmother still was like her own power of attorney, I think,
Mhm.
but she just didn't really have the mental capacity, I think, to articulate really what she wanted. And so like my mother and my mother's siblings kind of made the arbitrary decision that my grandmother was going to stay in this facility because it was easier for them to commute to, even though there were like all these signs that like the staff was not doing a really great job. Like I even saw like the nurses like snapping at each other some of the
Oh,
times, which is like really unfortunate. And so like we worked together and like we did a lot, especially you did a lot of education on like falls and falls prevention. And so like one day I got a call that my grandma was going into surgery because the nurses had found her one morning like laying on the floor and she broke her hip because she fell.
oh,
And that was so hard. And like, I just was like so frustrated because I was like, don't you know you're supposed to do all these things? Like working at that organization that we worked at, and then I'm sure like even through other organizations you worked at, like I just learned so much, even though I wasn't program side. But I was just like there are all of these best practices that you're supposed to put in place. Like, how did you not have these things in place to prevent this? And I will say that the one kind of shining light through all of that is because that happened. My grandma's now in a like they moved her out of that facility. She's now in a much better facility and much closer to at least my siblings who have like kids. So like my sisters and my grandmother's great granddaughters and grandsons can go visit her more often, which I think she really enjoys. So like it was a very unfortunate thing that happened, but like it definitely had like a silver lining at the end of the day, but it was still like something like really hard to deal with. And then also just me feeling, and then my sisters too, kind of feeling like helpless in a way, just because we didn't really have any decision making power. And it's just something that it was also really tough for me just because I didn't live as close. And I feel maybe like if I had lived closer, I might have been able to take more control over things as well. But yeah, it's definitely like really, really hard, I think, dealing with that situation, especially like during COVID. I don't even like want to know all the things that happened during those 2 years when no one was allowed to go visit her.
and oh, I'm just so sorry to hear that your family and your grandma had that experience with that poor care. It's so upsetting as a family member when you trust your loved one's care to other people, and you leave that building and you're praying that they're being like getting really good care and people are looking out for their well-being, and then that betrayal when something happens to them that could have been prevented, like that fall. It just, oh, I'm so sorry your family had to experience that, and your grandma, of course.
the majority of your career, if not all of your career, has been in the like gerontology aging space. And you went to school for that. Like, was your grandmother a big inspiration when it came to you deciding on that major in college? Like, what ultimately contributed to you wanting to do that for your job?
I guess in the end, my grandmother, of course, was my experience with her is what helped me to choose this career path. But I originally started out thinking in college, at least, that I wanted to work with children. So I majored in psychology and thought maybe I'll become like a child psychologist. And in one of my electives, it was an elective on aging that I took. And part of our work was to do, I forget what they call it, but something basically like you volunteer or work like a service job as part of your class. And then of course you report out on it. And I loved working with children, of course. I already knew this. And at this stage, my grandmother was in what do they call it? Skilled nursing facility. So she needed a lot of care. And as I was older and able to visit her, it became more and more apparent to me that the quality of care and engagement opportunities for adults in my grandmother's position, it just were really lacking and really sad. And I knew I didn't, there wasn't much I could do about it, but I wanted to do better for my grandma. So I guess where I started to think like, oh, I really, you know, I want to provide better engagement opportunities for older adults if that's a possibility. And I love working with kids. And at my university, there was this phenomenal intergenerational program. Essentially, there was an on-site child daycare center for kids ages like 2 to 4 years old, maybe, and an on-site adult daycare center for adults with memory loss or basically who needed supervision. And at the adult care side, they provided games and activities, meals, enrichment. But every couple of days, they brought together these older adults with memory loss and these preschoolers for intergenerational activities. And my professor at the time suggested that I volunteer to do my service work at this center. And knowing I loved kids and older adults in general, I thought, okay, this seems like a wonderful opportunity. And I can still remember today witnessing the most beautiful interactions between these adults with memory loss that had lost so much. Of course, their memory, but their independence, their dignity, their ability to communicate. And they would light up around these children. It was kind of symbiotic in the way that these preschoolers couldn't, they still were learning how to talk. They were still working on their fine motor movement. And in many ways, that was kind of similar to the older adults with memory loss. They had lost some of that fine motor movement in their fingers. They had trouble articulating their speech as well and saying what they meant. But when you paired the older adult with a preschooler in this capacity, working on different, for example, craft projects or singing, things like that, there wasn't a barrier anymore. And the older adults just loved that engagement with the kids, and the kids loved working with the older adults. So I think that experience in the intergenerational program was my first positive experience in seeing adults with dementia and memory loss, and this ability to provide them something positive and uplifting, something that helps to preserve the abilities they still have and bring them enjoyment and allow them to express themselves in the way that they still could, to build connections in the way that they still could. And that, I think, was a real turning point in my college career, at least, in deciding, kind of switching my shift from working solely with children to something that would allow me to work with older adults. And my career, there are many steps in between to where I am now as a gerontologist that happened. But I think that was really my first glimpse into something that I could do as a career that I felt would be really fulfilling.
That's such a great type of program. And I don't know how many senior centers or assisted living homes actually adopt something like that. But I mean, it sounds like the perfect thing to do to pair these young kids, like very young kids, with these older adults. And I've even heard of programs now where they're like bringing puppies in to like hang out with the older adults as well. I think because in a way
Yeah.
it probably makes them feel like the caregiver in a way,
Mhm.
even though a lot of their independence has been taken, but you can always be a caregiver to an animal.
Yes, I love those programs that bring in pets to older adults. I also foster cats or kittens, actually, just kittens, in my free time. And I'm really hoping now that the pandemic's allowing people to engage more in nursing homes, I'm really hoping that I can start some kind of like kitten engagement program with some of the local assisted living communities here, because just how you put it, the interaction with animals, the nurturing that people with dementia like feel from that, and who doesn't love this snuggly little puppy or kitty in their lap, you know? I do wish there were more intergenerational programs, but that's actually so funny enough. That is what I wrote my graduate thesis on, was intergenerational programs and the psychosocial and physical impact they have on both older adults and youth. And then I took my very first internship was at an organization that specialized in helping to expand intergenerational programs and conduct research to show their evidence and their value in supporting older adults and youth. But they're still making progress towards making them more well-known. Although I will say there was a landmark funding opportunity announced, I think it was last year, in which federal government established the first ever intergenerational program center or something like that. It's led by Generations United. And I think that just goes to show, it took a decade of this little organization chugging along, speaking the value of these programs to be able to have a national center now recognized on expanding them. But it's things like that. I wish we could educate people more about the opportunities there are out there to provide a really high quality of life to people with memory loss.
That would be so great if we could do that. Are there any nonprofits that you know of that are specializing in this intergenerational connectedness between older adults and young children, or even the animal part of it?
Oh, absolutely. So Generations United is probably the most well-known organization. They're based out of Washington, D.C., and they help to expand intergenerational programs from the policy level, from the community implementation level. I think every year they publish best practices. They truly are a phenomenal leader in that space. There's also, I believe it's the Eisner Foundation. I think it's based on the West Coast. And then I believe it's Harry and Jeanette Weinberg Foundation. They're a grant-making organization, I believe, but they focus a lot of their grant work on intergenerational efforts. And as these programs have become more widespread, thankfully, we're collecting more data on their value and helping to expand them further. And then as far as programs that bring together older adults and animals, yes, there are so many. So there's I'm trying to remember its acronym spelled out, the Human Animal Bond Research Institute, or HABRI. They, I believe, are also based out of Washington, D.C. Their work is to highlight the value of pets, companion animals, service animals in the human bond, in helping either to improve humans' health or in offering emotional support, that kind of like symbiotic relationship. I volunteered with them in the past as part of one of their committees on helping to reduce social isolation and loneliness. And we held the first ever conference on the topic of how pets and companion animals can be instrumental in helping to reduce loneliness among all age groups. And my role, of course, in this committee was to highlight the value of pets and companion animals and reducing loneliness among older adults specifically. And if you could see, there's so much, we still need more data, but there's a lot of fabulous data on how beneficial animals are to the lives of older adults. So I would definitely recommend HABRI. There's also another really wonderful organization. Oh, their name escapes me, but they work to help for older adults who have to transition into a rehabilitation facility or a nursing home, long-term care facility. This organization helps to put in place programs that allow those older adults to keep their pets, which I think is one of the most beautiful gifts you can give someone in that position. I don't know about you. I know you have dogs, Tisha, but I cannot even imagine, being forced to move into a facility for care and then having to give up my fur babies, my pets, that I wouldn't want to do my life without them. So this organization has established programs all around the country through a volunteer network that comes in as long as the long-term care facility or rehab facility agrees to let the person's pet stay with them. These volunteers come in and help to walk their dogs or help to take care of their cats. And it really helps, one, to, of course, lift the person's spirits who's receiving the care, and two, prevent these animals from going into shelters and potential euthanation. And then, of course, it gives the volunteers that sense of fulfilling, helping to keep an older adult with their beloved pet. So that's one of my favorite organizations that brings together pets and their owners. And then Mars Pet Care is another organization. I'm sure you're familiar with them. They produce some of probably the most pet food in the US and probably the world, I'm not sure. But they also do a ton of research on the human-animal bond and its value. But they donate a lot to communities and across the country, really, and to programs that help to keep older adults and people in general together with their pets. And it was through them that I saw a video in which there's a program that brings together on a weekly basis, local kittens who are up for adoption into nursing homes. And those nursing homes will then, they have the kittens there in a separate room. And so all, the nursing staff help to take care of the kittens, and the older adults get to play with them. And then most often the older adults family members adopt the kittens because they become so accustomed to seeing them at the long-term care facility. So just another way of how animals enrich the lives of those in long-term care facilities.
I personally think dogs are like therapy animals at every stage of life. But just to like connect them to these people, especially if they had previously had pets. I remember, so when my grandmother's husband died, my grandma got a dog named Honey. And she named him Honey, or her Honey, because every time she used to come home when my grandfather was still alive, she'd be like, "Hey, Honey, I'm home." And so she got the dog and named her Honey. And she had her, I was about 11, I think, when she got her. And then she went into the nursing home when I was, I think, 24, maybe. So she had her about 13 years. And I don't know that Honey had any like medical issues, but yeah, she wasn't allowed to take her with her. And I mean, that had to have been really, really hard for her. So that one organization that you were talking about that really helps older adults be able to keep their pets, I think is so, so wonderful. Mm-hmm. Because I think that, everything else is being taken from them, whether it's their memory, their sense of independence, their home. But if they can keep that one thing, especially that one thing that I think just brings joy to everyone, that's just so magical. It's so great. So I'm like an organization like I want to donate to right now.
So the program I'm thinking of that helps older adults stay with their pets once they transition to a long-term care facility It's called Pet Peace of Mind. I mentioned it's a volunteer program that partners with hospice programs to help those living in hospice continue to enjoy the comfort and healing powers of their pets. And you highlighted another important point about the role of people's pets in their lives. So very often, older adults, and really adults of all ages, will not seek the care they need, whether that's at the hospital, a rehab facility, a nursing home, because they do not want to abandon their pets. They don't want to be forced to give up their pets. And so they will, continue on that path of deterioration because they'll do whatever it takes to not have to be separated from their beloved kitty or dog. And also in many circumstances, older adults, probably adults of all ages, will forego their own medical and food expenses so that they can buy food and medicine for their pet. I think so often we think of taking care of the human and, an older adult, taking care of the older adult and their needs, making sure we get them to the right care and the right food. And we put all these programs in place to help them. But we forget that so often, these people will put the needs of their pet above their own, often at their own, the detriment of their own care. So how can we put programs and initiatives in place that take care of the older adult, but also honor that, they might slip that lovely meal you just delivered to their pet instead, because their pet hasn't had a meal today, or the medication. Maybe they'll forgo spending their small income on medication they need because their dog really needs that diabetic medication or dog food. So I think it goes hand in hand that we need to take care of people's pets and consider them as part of our journey as well.
It's definitely, I think, a great perspective and a great point to bring up, because I don't think many people aren't aware that that's happening, especially I think if you don't have an older adult in your life right now, or if they don't have a pet. But it's just like, to them, it's their children. I mean, I even see my dogs kind of as my kids. If you had an extra dollar and, are you going to feed yourself or are you going to feed your kid?
Yeah, so much of aging is like, I know when you were involved in the aging space too, of course, we want to better the lives for older adults and going through it all right now. But you can't help but think about too, what happens when you and I get old? Are we going to have to be separated from our pets? Are we going to have to move into a nursing home, sitting around, TV, and that's our entertainment for the day? We don't want those things either. So how can we start putting things, or keep things in motion, I should say, to make more progress and more changes?
Throughout your career, you've really been in this gerontology aging space. But I think that there's, aside from some of the challenges that you've witnessed with dealing with older adults and educating others on, the challenges that they're dealing with, there's also been a lot of challenges that you yourself have had to deal with in the workplace, especially like when it comes to certain inequities. Can you share some of those like early on experiences you remember that really stood out to you, and how you ultimately kind of handled them, or maybe like the challenges you had trying to figure out how to navigate those types of things?
Yeah. It's ironic. I'm a gerontologist, a quote unquote expert on aging, and ageism is so much of what we talk about. Against ageism, of course, against older adults. I don't think I was ever prepared for the ageism I would feel as a young adult, though. And sometimes I feel really selfish for saying that. But I think it's important to talk about now. So I'm glad you're giving the space to do that. When I first started my career, I was, fresh out of graduate school and excited about trying to be able to make a difference and use what I'd learned. And unfortunately, I was met with a lot of, barriers to trying to apply my knowledge and take ownership for the work that I did, the research, the new ideas. I was frequently told, I'm too young to take on more work, or, what ideas do I have? And then my superiors would take credit and ownership for the ideas that I would bring to the table. And even though I would have really great data, showing like of the impact that my work had made, or the really significant work we've done with outreach compared to the year before, or our customer satisfaction, or how we had grown these national efforts, I was frequently still told, oh, well, you're too young for a career advancement. You're too young for that promotion. And I remember just being so devastated that I couldn't advance, or my advancement was not being based on the merit of my work, but rather my age, that I was too young. And that was just so discouraging. And I think as women, we're often groomed to be more humble when talking about our accomplishments, especially in the workplace. And that is more humble than it is maybe men are in talking about their accomplishments. And I definitely had that own, I don't know, absorbed that into my own personality. I didn't really, and still don't, I still struggle sometimes to talk about my accomplishments and the value I bring. And so the first part of my career was really a period of growth. I like to look back on it, of barriers I learned to overcome by finding my own voice and being able to articulate the value I bring, and having the confidence to push back against those who said, I couldn't be a leader, or I didn't bring value, or I wasn't worthy of that advancement. And it was wild to me that I found, my employment had told me, I wasn't valued, or I wasn't ready for that type of leadership or responsibility. But in the engagements I had through my employment outside of that company, the other organizations were asking me to be like their keynote speaker, to be the expert at their conferences, to be the expert speaking on Capitol Hill. And that was when it really started to click to me, when I had that external recognition outside of my company, that I have a voice, I have value. And just because this one place or certain individuals may not help me to grow upon it, doesn't mean that I can't go somewhere else to have the impact I want to have. And I really hope that as women continue to grow our place in the workspace, that we really help to lift one another up, because it's so important to help each other in this journey, and to help us all feel confident in finding our voice and speaking loudly.
There's just so far for us to still come as women, especially, which is so sad. It's not even all the time that it's like men who are posing certain challenges or like challenging us, but oftentimes, like, I've had female women leaders be the ones who are kind of causing some of these like external or internal conflicts for me. And I think it's awful. It's so awful. And I don't know why, and I psychologically, I understand why. I understand kind of that competition and feeling like, women haven't been able to be in leadership positions for so long, and I don't want to compete with these other women. Like, I can kind of understand why it happens, but it doesn't justify it in the least. I've struggled with this too, especially earlier on in my career, and I didn't have those direct comments said to me, but I could kind of feel that were people's perspectives. And so like I would internalize that sometimes, and I was always like afraid or hesitant to like ever talk about my personal age at work. Because I felt like if I threw out that number, people were going to start judging me, especially because a lot of the times
I would work with people who were older than me and not even necessarily like very much older than me. I think at the organization we worked at, like, I think that age range kind of skewed more older than I think a lot of the other companies I worked for. But even if I was working with someone where they were just like 5, 10 years older, I also just felt very inferior sharing my age. Like I was immediately going to get judged. And then also just knowing that, despite my age, I've always looked younger too, which how you were saying, like, I feel kind of guilty for saying, like, I'm getting judged for being young. I sometimes feel like guilty for saying like, yeah, like I look younger. Cause people are like, well, I don't look younger. You should feel good about that. But, I think like that also like aids in my insecurity as well. And then also feeling like I also sound very young. Like I've always been very insecure about my voice. And I remember the company we were actually working at, we actually got thrown into this like public speaking workshop together. And they brought in this woman. I don't remember her name or what company she worked for, but she was supposed to teach us better public speaking and presentation skills. And before I entered that workshop, I actually felt pretty comfortable public speaking, but I always know that I can learn, a tip or two about like how to present better, especially like when talking to senior stakeholders or just larger groups of people with like varying degrees of understanding and knowledge. And so like I was very happy to go in and at least pick up a few tricks, even though like I had really never kind of gotten like the butterflies that people get when public speaking, which I'm very, very grateful for. But I remember maybe the first or the second day, she had us do this exercise where we went around the room in a circle. There was maybe like 8 or 10 of us. And she wanted us to say, hi, my name is this, and I do this for the organization. And I remember when she got to me, I was like, hi, my name is Tisha, and I'm a digital marketing analyst. And she like stopped me and she's like, no, say that again. And so I said it again. She's like, no, make your voice more manly. She's like, you need to make your voice more deeper and more manly. And I remember at the time, I was just in hysterics almost. Like I just started laughing. And like to the point where it actually took me probably like a good 60 seconds before I could actually repeat myself. So I kind of like felt embarrassed too that I was just like laughing. I was like, did she really just say that? But thinking back on that, I was like, wow, to tell a woman that she needs to make her voice more like a man. And from someone who was supposed to be an expert in public speaking, I felt like she was saying, like, if you want to be respected as a public speaker, you need to sound more like a man. And I was already having like doubts and insecurities about the way I sounded. And I actually came out of that workshop, I think, feeling worse about myself as a speaker than when I went into it.
Same. Similarly, I struggle with the insecurity of my very young sounding voice. And similarly, I think I look and sound a lot younger than I am. So it's a very big insecurity when it comes to the workplace. Do remember that workshop, and I got the same feedback that I needed to make my voice sound deeper. I remember it was something like channel Count Dracula or something, and it felt so foreign and weird to try to speak from that, I guess, imitate that voice. But it's just such a harsh reality that we need to change how we sound because we're too young to be taken seriously. It's so frustrating.
It's very frustrating. Yeah. I mean, if we're coherent, if people can understand what we're saying, should it actually matter what our voice sounds like? And I can't even imagine, thankfully, I'm a native English speaker. I was born in the United States, but just to think about the people who aren't born here or who grow up with parents who are not first generation Americans, and to then have this dialect and this language barrier on top of it, like I can really empathize with some of the struggles and challenges that they face, and even some of the discrimination that they must come across too.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think for me, like you kind of talked about the defining moment in your career where you finally were getting this external validation, if you will, and being invited to be a keynote speaker and speak at conferences. And I think one of the things that really stand out to me, and I don't know if I ever told it to this person, but one of my jobs a few years ago, I was reporting into this woman named Emily. And Emily, if you hear this, you'll know who you are. So I want to say thank you because I remember just one day in a meeting, and I think she's probably repeated this a couple times since then over the years, but she said, Tisha, one day you are going to be my boss. Like you're going to run this department and I'm going to be reporting into you. And I just like one remember feeling so like, oh, like thank you so much. Like I just felt so like great about that, like that compliment and like how sincere she was. And then just reflecting on it, probably even later that day and today, years later, like she's not that much older than me, like like a handful of years. And so for her to be like that confident and to like as a female not feel threatened by
Yeah.
me,
Mm-hmm.
like that was just so it was so amazing. And it like did so much for me that there are leaders out there who recognize great things in others, especially other women, and call it out and don't feel threatened and don't feel the need that they have to compete. And so that was just, like a really nice moment for me that I think was helpful. And I hope other people can have similar experiences like we've been able to have to kind of, help boost our confidence in this area.
Yeah, that is beautiful. I hope all young people have an Emily in their workplace that recognizes their value and helps them to grow in their confidence of what they can contribute. And I think, Tisha, too, like so much of what our generation can contribute is being the Emily's to those that report to us. And that's, I don't know about you, but honestly, that's one of the greatest takeaways, and if I could say gifts, that I learned in that period of growth of being judged for how young I was rather than the merit of my work. Every facet it has shaped the type of supervisor and I hope leader that I am. And I try to be the exact opposite that I experienced from my superiors. Whenever those that report to me have great ideas or launch a new effort, I give them that space in our client meetings to talk about it so that they can get the credit, but also the experience in presenting and being able to articulate the value of their work or their new project. And I try to, on monthly basis, is check in on their professional growth goals so that they feel they're growing in this role, and how can I, as their supervisor, support them in that? Because these young people, several of the people that report to me are fresh out of school, recently out of school. And I remember what that's like. And you're looking for the recognition of what you're doing right and how to grow in the places where you can improve upon. And I hope that it's our generation, you and I, because of what we've experienced from maybe the old forms of leadership, that we offer praise maybe even more frequently than we offer criticism. And then when we do offer criticism, it's constructive feedback and constructive criticism that helps people to grow. I guess I hope that's our wave of the future. And I don't know about you, but I found some really incredible resources too that have been so helpful to me in being a female boss, a female leader. And I hope more of that becomes more widespread and women supporting each other.
Hi, my wonderful goat friends. Firstly, thank you so much for your support and listening. If you're enjoying this conversation and other episodes of the podcast, I'd like to ask you to please give us a 5-star review on Spotify, Apple, or whichever platform you are listening on right now. And if you're so inclined, we love to hear your feedback in a full review. Also, might be a great idea to hit subscribe on that platform you're listening to right now so you can get notified of new episodes as they are released. Thank you so much again for being one of our loyal GOAT listeners.
So you actually joined as a volunteer board member for the local chapter of the Alzheimer's Association. When did you get involved with them, and what's that experience been like so far?
Oh, I love it. I think I joined with them in 2017. So I've been volunteering with them for about 5 years now. And I've started out as a volunteer for their Young Professional Committee, which essentially is helping to engage young professionals in the DC, Virginia, and Maryland area in what we call the fight to end Alzheimer's. So we volunteered together to help raise funds, but also to, for example, provide enrichment at local nursing homes to adults that have dementia. We'll do crafts with them, engage them in other fun projects. And, as we can through happy hours and lots of other events, we try to increase awareness and education about Alzheimer's disease, but also how people can find support. I think so often young caregivers are forgotten about as a generation that's also providing care for older adults with Alzheimer's and dementia. But I've loved volunteering with them. I'm president of our junior board for the Alzheimer's Association DC chapters area, as well as the DC area's more full board. But what I love most, I think, about participating is that it brings together people from all disciplines, all types of careers, all stages of life behind one mission. And we're united in that the way that Alzheimer's has impacted our families, our life, our loved ones. It's so much in my professional career as a gerontologist or focused on aging and improving the health of older adults. That professional career, I'm surrounded by people and aging. That's all we talk about. But to have this other sector in my life where it's people who, like from major accounting firms, finance firms, of course, those from like the nursing home organizations as well, from think tanks, those on Capitol Hill. I think one of our greatest volunteers or board members is also leading like the Association of Cleaning Products or something like that. Just like all of these people who seemingly have nothing in common come together on this beautiful cause of trying to raise awareness and funds for research for Alzheimer's disease. And I think that's what I love. It's being surrounded by others who are so passionate about a cause close to our heart. And then being able to, with our work with our junior board and our young professionals in the area, to engage young professionals in the same mission and help them not feel so alone. A lot of our board members, our junior board members who, under the age of 39 is I think our cutoff for our junior board, one of their loved ones has dementia, or even more challenging is early onset dementia, I think. Dementia is bad enough when someone gets it at the age of 60, but early onset I think typically occurs around the ages of like 40 to 55, I believe. And so seeing people our age, Tisha, whose dad, is suffering from dementia loss and, maybe doesn't remember their grandkids' names now, or someone our age who is, we're still trying to get our careers off the ground, right? And buy a home and all these other like young professional goals, but they're also providing part-time or full-time care to their parent with dementia. It's a really challenging life. And part of what I love about the ALS Association is they help to illuminate that younger caregiver, they're not alone. There's support groups if they want to talk about it, but if they don't want to talk about it, they can come to one of our events and they're surrounded by other young people who have been impacted by ALS and know what they're going through. So I really do love that work.
So awesome and so beautiful that there's just so many different people that are involved and dedicated to the cause, and that simultaneously it's just a space where you can get a lot of empathy and understanding where you probably couldn't get it in other places. Not because people, I think, aren't willing to give it, but it's just hard to relate, I think. And yeah, I mean, when I think of caregivers too, like I never really even think of people in their 20s or 30s. I usually think of, the stereotype, like you're at least like in your mid 40s, probably 50s, like you have kids of your own, you're trying to manage your older parent or aunt or uncle or something. But yeah, there's definitely like, even if you are in your 20s or 30s, you don't have kids, you do still have the challenge of trying to like manage your social life or keep your career on track. It's so interesting now that you're mentioning this. I'm like, I do know someone. So this person I know is actually a contractor I'm working with at my job, and his father doesn't have Alzheimer's or dementia, but he's a caretaker for him because his father was actually like in a really bad car accident a few months ago. And so now like he can't really do much for himself. He's going through rehab. Um, and so like he's like on a medicine schedule. He like needs at home nurses to help him like get dressed and shower and eat and things like that. And I was talking to my contractor a couple weeks ago, and he was opening up to me about, like how tough it's been for him because he's felt really burnt out, like trying to juggle work, trying to juggle social life and really not being able to have a social life right now. And then feeling like he needs to spend every waking minute that he's not working with his dad to like be there. Because really like he is the only person in the area who can help his dad. But also feeling guilty, like that's what he had, like his obligation to do that, even though he's hired some of these like nurses to come in a couple days a week. But it's hard, especially like in your 20s, 30s. And I think that, like you said, like some of these challenges that people our age deal with, I think get overlooked sometimes, or it's just like, oh, like that's not really that hard of a thing to do. But yeah, I definitely think it is. And, because you're really just trying to find yourself and your identity too. And to then have to translate and transfer all of yourself to another person is like really, really hard.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, I'm so sorry to hear of your coworker's experience. That's devastating. And you nailed it, the guilt too. I think these young caregivers feel so much guilt no matter what they do. If they spend every spare moment they have with the parent they're providing care for, or if they take maybe one night a week to go on a date or go to a happy hour with friends, they still feel that guilt if they could be doing more. And that loss of like the life they could maybe have, not that they would trade it for anything, but the life they could have, the social life they could have if they weren't providing that care. And financially speaking, I mean, I'm sure care is very expensive. Nursing care is very expensive. And as a young professional, trying just to pay your own rent and your own bills, and then thinking of how to find that financial support for your parent that needs care it's challenging.
Chelsea, everyone I have and invite on this show, I do so because in some way or another, they've been inspiring to me throughout the work they're doing, their journey. And so I always love to ask who or what in your life has been your biggest inspiration and why?
I think the person that's been my greatest inspiration is my grandmother. I know I've talked about her so much already, but even today, I still really look up to her. The woman I knew before dementia, she was a frequent volunteer in her community. She was generous with her time and her money and giving to causes that were near and dear to her heart, like children's diabetes, cancer, animal shelters, preservation of historical landmarks in the community. And she was very social. She always made a priority to put her friends first, and of course, above all else, family first. And then as she continued through her journey with Alzheimer's disease, feeling that I wanted to be able to give a voice to those like her with dementia that no longer had a voice, that were helpless. And seeing how she went through that continuum of care with Alzheimer's with such grace and still such love for life and for her family and what she had left to enjoy. she was just so inspirational to me, and how you can give of yourself, but also in ways to want to do more to improve the quality of life for people with dementia. And so I hope in my lifetime I can be as generous with my love and my time to my family, to my friends, to my community, but also to improve the lives of those with Alzheimer's disease, and those that are, and their loved ones that are impacted by it.
I love how she's inspired you. I think that the people or the things in life that have the biggest inspiration or the potential to be our biggest inspirations are always those that make us want to be better people and grow and just make the world a better place.
Yeah. And I think, I guess I left this part out, but part of it was when she did have dementia, it was those sparks, those pure moments of joy I shared with her, and being reminded of you can still have these wonderful connections and experiences with your loved one with dementia. And so I guess she was my inspiration in that way of like really emphasizing and helping to educate others about these people with dementia. They're still so much of the person that you love and you have these relationships with, and there's so many ways you can still build on your relationship with them and enjoy your time with them and add value to both of, their life and their journey and your own. And so the way she walked through her journey with Alzheimer's is just really inspiring to me. I would welcome, if people are interested in volunteering in their community to support those that are impacted by Alzheimer's disease, to connect with their local Alzheimer's Association chapter in the DC area. We have our young professional group called Young Nationals, the group I mentioned, where we host lots of events throughout the year and opportunities to connect with other young professionals impacted by the disease or interested in helping to end it, of course, through fundraising and things like that. So I welcome anyone who's interested in volunteering. They're welcome to reach out to me, but also to stay connected, stay engaged with your loved ones with Alzheimer's disease. Recognize this is a really challenging time for them, as it is for you, as maybe a caregiver, a loved one, watching them transition through this phase, and reach out to your loved ones, your community, for opportunities for support. There are so many resources, both at the community level and the national level, available for adults with Alzheimer's disease and also adults with needs of other types of care. And I think often people feel like they're in crisis when they start their caregiving journey. And so look for those services. Elder Care Locator is an example of a really great resource to help you locate services and places to contact for care in your community. It was so nice today, Tisha, to talk about the inequities that young professionals face, especially women. And I don't think we even got to talk on the inequities that especially young women of color face. And I hope that through your podcast and bringing light to these challenges, these inequities, that women really make an effort to support one another, to lift one another up, and to be the mentors that we hope and wish we had in our journeys and our careers. So thank you so much for inviting me today, and for a really lovely discussion.
Thank you so much, Chelsea, for doing this. It's been so great chatting with you. And it's also just been so great being able to explore very analogous experiences that we've had and challenges throughout our lives, and just being able to kind of share in some of those empathies and be able to connect, and hopefully also be able to inform a lot of people too, and make more people feel comfortable about sharing more if they're having inequity, realizing their worth and their value. And then also just, highlighting, I think a big thing that we talked about that was really important for me during this conversation was just talking about the challenges that young caregivers have. Not to devalue any of the struggles that other caregivers have, but I think, like, as we talked about, it's so underestimated. And I think that that's like a clear area for opportunity for us to invest more in resources for those people. So thank you so much for sharing that. Your insights have been so, I think, so helpful for me, and I hope they have for others as well.
Oh, thank you. Likewise. This has been such an illuminating conversation.
Not Your Average Goat is produced and edited by me, Tisha Gillespie, with music by Sergey Quadrado and Antoine Blazov. All content is copyrighted and should not be recreated, reproduced, or reused without explicit consent. Please visit notyouraveragegoat.org/contact for questions.